And welcome to our first big story for today, as we tackle a topic that strikes at the core of Nigeria's legal system, the rights of detainees. Across the country, there have been numerous reports of citizens, including journalists and activists, being unlawfully detained. And sometimes for weeks without, being formally whether arraigned or charged or given even a fair trial. The Nigerian Constitution guarantees that no citizen should be held beyond 48 hours without charges. Yet, in reality, many detainees languish in cells for much longer, raising questions, serious concerns as well about the state of justice in Nigeria.
So these violations not only affect those detained, but challenge the very principle of democracy itself, human rights also, and the rule of law. Now today we ask, what is going wrong in Nigeria's justice system and how can we protect the rights of detainees? Now to help us explore the issue, we have our guest here in the studio, Kene Osuji, a legal practitioner, and he'll be giving us, first-hand explanation and also perhaps maybe in some cases instruction as to how exactly detainees should be attended to in our judicial system. You're welcome, Kene. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Mazino. Thank you, Judith. It's
Thank
always
you
a
so
pleasure.
much. Always a pleasure as
Grand.
well.
So, Kene, first off, we seem to have a certain disregard for detainees. It's like once a detainee, you're inhuman, or you're not human, and so there's a certain inhumanity that they experience. Why is that so in the Nigerian context when it comes to our judiciary and how the rights of detainees are attended to?
Rightfully so. It's quite unfortunate that every Nigerian, once you're behind bars, you lose that right to dignity of persons. And it's what violates what the Constitution says. Even though you're a detainee, according to the Nigerian law, you should not be subject to inhumane or degrading treatments. And we've seen in the news, we are aware of cases where Nigerians have been brutalized as soon as they go behind bars. And the Nigerian Constitution is very clear on these facts. Every Nigerian, regardless of whether you're behind bars or you're out of cell, you should be treated like a human being. You have your rights as enshrined in the Nigerian Constitution.
I have a very disturbing story to tell you. So along with you, we're going to have a guest who has experienced being behind bars, who has experienced being detained. Well, not just one, we actually had 3 on ground who were going to come over and tell their stories. Unfortunately, only just yesterday, after giving us addresses to get to and going there with our cameras and crew, we discovered that they weren't there. In fact, they were at a different location, far away from the location that we were given. Upon proceeding to that location, they disappeared again. Calling them, they're like, why exactly do you want? Well, no, we just want your story. So we had one of them agree to come over and be with you on this session here today. But unfortunately, we've been unable to contact
It's
them.
been MIA.
Exactly. There seems to be a
MIA.
certain dread or fear that's planted in detainees that even after they are released, this is what we get. What's that trauma? What did they experience? In your experience, what have you seen that the experience has been for them?
So, because of my experience in criminal litigation, I run an NGO that defends Nigerians who cannot afford to pay for legal representation. It's not very nice. Sometimes I go to see them and they don't have slippers. Sometimes I go to them and they don't have shoes, the same piece of clothing once you're arrested. Until you're released, you wear the same item of clothing. Feeding is a problem. Sometimes you get calls. I get calls from the inmates behind cells in prisons asking for money for food. It's quite, sometimes they say they're sick. So the conditions in there are not very comfortable, and there's also an allocation from the Nigerian government when it comes to budgets, but how well are they being fed? How well are they treated? How well do they have access to family members? How well do they have access to legal representation remains a question that needs answering by the authorities in Nigeria.
What are the systemic issues that have allowed for such unlawful detainees, unlawful detention, and such inhumane and vile experience to take place in our system?
I think we have to look at the system. The system rights from the body who is entitled by law to cater for detainees, which is the Ministry of Interior, Federal Ministry of Interior. Then you subdivide it to the agency of the Nigerian Correctional Service. This is the body that is supposed to cater for the welfare of detainees and people who are incarcerated in prisons across the Federation. So one is the budgetary allocation. As of 2022, a meal, the inmate an inmate in Nigeria was entitled to about 750 naira per day for feeding. How well is this money spent? How well is there a monitoring system? The prisons are overcrowded. We have about a capacity in prisons. We have over 50-something thousand Nigerians awaiting trial. So the cells are too small to handle the number of inmates that are being brought in every single day. So we need to look out for expansion of prisons. We need to look out for having states also take up the right to build prisons. The question is, should we privatize our prisons as it is done in other divisions across the country, or should we leave it to the hands of the federal government?
So what would be a proper system overhaul? What would that look like?
I think that we have to look at other jurisdictions. In the American system, you have prisons that are privatized. You have people who build prisons, cater for inmates, and the welfare is said to be better, because as it is right now, the institution is failing. The Nigerian Correctional Service has more to chew because they cannot afford to cater for every inmate brought into the cells. They cannot afford to feed them properly. So I would advise that we privatize our prison systems to ensure that the security and welfare of every Nigerian, because they are still Nigerians, is protected even when they are behind bars.
That's a very, very dicey one if you want to privatize the correctional system, because let's talk about racketeering then and all of that. But that's a subject for another day. I want to talk about the law that states that you cannot be detained past 48 hours without any charge. My security guard was detained for a week, no charge, and then eventually just let loose. What implications does this have for the agencies now? Now, we know they can't afford, as you have put it, to keep these guys in prison, feed them and award them their basic rights. However, they still keep people there for longer than is necessary. What's the implication for the agencies then?
Yes. So, rightfully said, there's a law that says that every Nigerian who is charged for, who is detained and arrested should be brought to court within 24 hours if there's a court within 40-kilometer radius, or if there's no court in the next within 48 hours. That's a law. However, there are exceptions. But that's the general law. So in any event when a person is arrested and detained, the law expects that that Nigerian be brought to a court. However, we know as a practice that that's not the case. That's not the case because Nigerians over time have spent months even without knowing the offense in which they were arrested for.
Do you remember the photographer from last week?
Yes, I do, of course. I mean, when you think about the photographer and him being held in prison,
you know the
and
story,
even
yes?
after, you know the story. You do know there's a very popular story of a photographer who resigned via text message from his job, and his employer took him in, had him arrested, and even after the employer had withdraw the charges, they still held him on a false, allegedly false. It said it was on intentional abuse or insult, something very funny. And so I have to ask about, the legal safeguards that exist in preventing such abuses, like being wrongfully held, not being charged on time, your rights being denied, your rights, inhumane treatment and abuse. What are those safeguard rails? Yes,
so every Nigerian who is detained, one has a right to legal representation. You have a right to call your counsel. You have a right to call family members to inform them of the situation. You have the right, to silence. You don't have to say anything until you consult with a legal practitioner. You have pictorial rights. You have a right to be charged to court within a reasonable period of time. So these are the rights that are available to you. However, the problem remains enforcing these rights. The same constitution says that if you're detained or arrested unlawfully, you have a right to compensation.
Exactly.
How many Nigerians who have been detained unlawfully have sought to ensure that they get compensation.
To put it very delicately, you're now shifting the responsibility to the individuals. You're saying that they haven't pursued compensation. Is that what you're saying?
So the problem stems from the fact that Nigerians don't know all the rights available to them. So if I don't know my rights, I wouldn't know how to enforce the rights. So even if I couldn't afford legal representation, the laws make provision for a legal aid council, which means that it is a body in Nigeria that provides free legal services mandatorily to every Nigerian who cannot enforce, who cannot pay for legal representation. So Nigerians need to know they have these rights and need to insist on these rights so that they can enjoy these rights. I'll give an example with the issue of bail. Almost every Nigerian when arrested pays for bail. That's a fact. But if the right procedure is followed, particularly in Lagos State, I'm speaking as a matter of fact, bail is free. So if you follow the right channel, the right procedure, insist on not paying for bail, insist on your counsel speaking to the divisional police officer, I can assure you that even if you pay for bail, you're released, the money that has been paid will be refunded to you. I'm speaking again as a matter of knowledge of what I know in Lagos State. So we need Nigerians to know that they have these rights and we need them to speak and ensure that they stand on these rights so that the rights they have are not infringed upon.
Now, Kene, you represent a civil society organization that deals with situations like this, and you see this firsthand. This is literally your job, and so I have to ask about collaboration. Besides CSOs like yourself, what can the state government and maybe the federal level do to just declutter the system? Because you said 5,000, or was it 50 or 5,000 inmates that have not had their day in court?
Over 50,000.
Over 50,000, there we go. So what then will be, is it a collaboration? What would you like to see as CSO and somebody who's in the field, who understands it? What would you want to see that will best address in bringing down that number?
I would like to say transparency. I'd like to say the government should be more transparent to what is going on. I'd like to say that transparency involves a number of things. It involves adopting measures to ensure that we know what is happening behind bars. The laws stipulate that the chief magistrate in Lagos State, for instance, or the chief judge should go across detention facilities in the state from time to time to know the offenses in which people have been charged for. And then if it's something that can be granted bail, grant them bail, release them, so we need to open up the system. Because the more closed the system is, the more clogged it's going to be. So one, transparency. We need to open up the system, the prisons, the detention facilities across the country. Government needs to ask for help when they need help. If they need to get a loan or increase, not just a loan, if they need to increase the budgetary allocation for the Nigerian Correctional Service through the Ministry of Interior, they should do so that we can have more prisons, more detention facilities across the country. Then we need to also adopt technology to ensure that every legal practitioner can see who is behind bars, who needs a lawyer, and then opt to take up the case. We need to open up the system, because if, as a legal practitioner, there's a portal somewhere I can log in. I'm not very busy this month, for instance. I can go on and see, okay, somebody was just arraigned in court and doesn't have access to a legal practitioner. I can then decide to take up his case, and then, my name will be attached to his case, and then I'll follow up diligently. If I don't follow up diligently, then I'll be maybe in trouble.
Is there incentive for lawyers to actually carry on cases pro bono?
The NGO that I founded, we give incentives to legal practitioners when they go to court. I don't earn a fee. I've visited a number of Nigerians do that pro bono. I don't earn a fee, but we give incentives to lawyers who who volunteer for our organization.
Then, on the case of pursuing compensation, could you please give us step-by-step how you could go about it as a person who's been wrongfully detained? What do I do step by step? Where do I go?
So for you to bring an action order for compensation, first thing that comes to mind is the fundamental human rights enforcement action, because there must have been a breach of your fundamental human rights. You've been detained unlawfully, you'll be subjected to inhumane or degrading treatment. So I speak to a counsel, a lawyer, and then he files an action under the appropriate section of the rights that have been infringed upon, and then the lawyer would, of course, sue the necessary parties if it's the Nigerian Police Force, if it's the Nigerian Correctional Service.
They will be sued.
They'll be sued. But I want to draw us back to the law that speaks to 48 hours, which you mentioned, Mazino. The law there's a general law. However, there are exceptions to the law. If a person has been charged for a capital offense, the stipulation or requirement to be charged to court within 48 hours does not apply. There's also what we know as a remand order. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act says that the Nigerian Police Force, pending instituting a formal case against a person, can apply to a court to remand an individual for a period of first 14 days and subsequently another 14 days, pending which they should conclude investigations. If after 28 days the investigation is not concluded, they may apply, I think, for another, 20 or so days, making it about 54, 58 days period where a person is kept behind bars. So if the law states that 48 hours is the maximum time, there's just an exception, and most of the time we see that the Nigerian Police Force or other enforcement agencies like the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission go through the remand order system to detain people beyond 48 hours.
Can you explain what a capital offense is so that we know the difference now? So
a capital offense is an offense that is punishable by death, which includes armed robbery, murder, treason, rape, and those offenses that, if convicted, will lead to about 21 years or more
in prison. And solving, I was hoping in my last question when I asked, I was hoping that you were going to mention something, so I'm going to ask you that. In solving, in bringing a lasting solution when it comes to our justice system, do you think that the very first step should be identifying that our justice system has a problem?
Yes. Yes.
Why do you say so? Why yes?
I'll give you a simple scenario. Many times when I'm going to court to defend somebody who is incarcerated, who's behind bars, I'm leaving my house in Lekki. And before I get to the Lekki toll gate, I get a call from prison saying that the court won't sit. I'm the counsel in the case. I'm the one to inform my client that the court won't sit. But they have already, the client is quite embarrassing. And from prison, I get a call that the court won't sit and I'm the lawyer in charge. Many times I'm going to court and I arrive in court and I hear that the judge or the magistrate is taking a course in Morocco. Mm-hmm. And then my client has been behind bars for over 12 months. And the next adjournment is in 2 months because he cannot meet up his bail condition. That's a systemic problem. That's a fundamental problem with our judicial system.
Does the government knows that the system has a fundamental problem?
I believe they do. If they do not, I'm telling them right now that there's a problem with the judicial system in Nigeria.
Do we need more judges? Now, that's a question that came up last month, and I see you mulling it in your mind now. Do we need more judges?
We did. It's the system. Adding more personnel may not create a big difference. It's a system. What system is in place to ensure for quick adjournments, not quick, but short adjournments? What system is in place for training and retraining of our judges, the registrars? Why must I have to keep pausing when I'm making arguments in court because the court is writing? I can't speak like this in court because the court will tell me, hold on, stop, I'm writing. So the problem is with the system. It's with the system, and we need an overhaul of the system. We need to adopt technology to our court systems to ensure that things go smoothly and fast.
Okay, we want to say thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you for doing this with us. It's been quite an insightful conversation, and it's very clear that the road to an entire overhaul is a long way, and hopefully the powers that be understand that this is a problem. And also, if you're watching, hopefully by now you know what your rights are. You're not supposed to be held for 48 hours. You have a right to a lawyer or a counsel, and bail is free.
In Lagos. In Lagos.
Kene Osuji is a legal practitioner. He joined us today to answer the question about Nigeria's judicial justice system and detainees' right.